Get my clicker working. Start recording. Okay. Today's chapter is very different from any. I'd say it's different. You all may not look at it that way, but I felt like it was a little bit different from the ones that we've studied so far. The other chapters, because there was a lot of history involved in coming up, and there's not a lot of history in this chapter. It's basically a description of some of the miracles that God performed through Elisha. As a matter of fact, 5 of them are in this one chapter. And as you know, Elisha asked for a double portion of the spirit of Elijah, and God blessed that request. Elijah performed 8 miracles, and Elisha performed 16. Now, in the email I sent out this morning, I posted these in there in case you wanted to print them out. It's not necessary, but we're going to be looking at numbers. Well, those are Elijah's 8, and then here's Elisha's 16. And we're going to talk a little bit about number 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 in this one chapter. As a matter of fact, if you look over at the verses that are quoted, you can see that they're all in from chapter 4. Every one of them. I mean, I don't know why the writer of Second Kings loaded them up in this one, but they did, because I don't think they're in any kind of chronological order. I think they're just in there. That's what the author wanted. So we're going to look at 5 of them, but we're also going to look at some other things that you all know me. I'll be going in a direction, and then all of a sudden I'll go, oh, how about this? Both Elijah and Elisha, as you all know, I'm sure, were prophets who lived in the northern kingdom, what we call Israel. The nation split in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. But before we look at chapter 4, I'd like for us to consider what Israel did, what the nation did, what the people did or didn't do, depending on what scripture we're looking at, to get in the shape that they were in, that caused just so many problems, ultimately taken into captivity. Now, okay, so we're a few hundred years after the reign of David, when the nation of Israel was obeying God. Obviously they were, human beings, and there were sins and so on. But as a whole, the nation was obeying God, obeying God's law when David was the king. And then it became progressively less and less and less. And by the time we get to Ahab's rule, they aren't even considering God or his laws. They don't even, probably doesn't even come up in a conversation. So I wanted to start out by taking a look at some of the law that Israel should have obeyed, and then part of the law that Israel didn't obey, that shows why they got in the shape that they were in. Leviticus 26, obviously this isn't 1 through 46. Anyway, he says not to make idols, or to set up for yourselves images or sacred pillars, or place a figured stone, that's another idol, in your land to bow down to it, for I am Yahweh your Elohim. Okay, so they were worshiping Baal, and they had groves, they had idols just about everywhere. And if you remember, matter of fact, I have this a little further down, I think, but if you, okay, yeah, I do. So I'll skip that. In verse 2 here, he says, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am Elo, I mean, I am. Wow, my brain is going crazy. Wow, I'm the Lord. Uh, one of
No
the
way.
do what? Yahweh. Thank you, boy. This is going to be a bad day. I can tell, folks. If I can't remember Don Liggett's name and Yahweh, I'm in big trouble. Well, one of the first things that King Jeroboam did when the nation split of Israel split was to change the time of the Feast of Tabernacles and I contend other holy days and so on also, but we don't have scriptures that back that up. And he put idols to worship in the northern part of Israel and right on the border of the southern tribes. And they did that. He did that so that the Israelites wouldn't go back to Jerusalem to worship and not come back. And he'd be the king of nothing. He tells them, God tells them that they will be blessed greatly if they obey his statutes and commandments, and they'll receive rains when needed. So their land will produce wonderful crops and their trees will bear delicious fruits. And he says in verse 5 that their harvest will be so great that as soon as one is finished, another will start. He says, if you walk in my statutes, if you keep my commandments, if you listen to me and do what I tell you, I will give you rains when you need them. So the land will yield its produce and the trees will bear their fruit. Indeed, and this I thought was interesting, and we've all read it before, but your your threshing for the crops are going to last you till it's time to pick the grapes, and the grapes will last you until sowing time, and you'll eat your food to the full and live securely in your land. And he goes on and he tells them not to fear man or beast. He will fight for them. 5 will chase 100, and 100 will chase 1,000. No one will be able to stand against his people. He says, I'll grant peace in the land. You're not going to have anybody coming in and invading you if you will listen to me. So that you'll lie down and sleep peacefully. I will eliminate the harmful beasts from your land. And no army's going to come in and try to take over. But you'll chase your enemies and they'll fall before you because I'm fighting for you. I'm with you. 5 of you will chase 100, 100 will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall before you by the sword. Your battles, if you do have to fight a battle, you're going to win. I'm with you. He says they'll be fruitful, their families will grow, and God will confirm his covenant with them. Their crops will be so abundant, they'll have to clear out the old so they have room for the new. I thought that was really an interesting scripture, verse 10 there. And most important of all, he says he will dwell with them and they will be his people. And I will not reject you. And I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. If you will just do what I'm telling you to do. And they did for a while. But beginning in verse 14, he tells them what will happen and did if they fail to obey him. And not only did they fail to obey him, they basically spit in his face. They openly disobeyed him at every turn. And this is how they ended up in the mess that they were in and where we are in our normal going over the prophets. He says if they don't obey him, they will be afraid. They will get diseases. Their crops will be eaten by their enemies. And those who hate you will rule over you. And you'll flee when no one is pursuing you. And he says, there'll come a time when I've had it with you people. If you don't obey me, I will destroy your high places. I'll cut down your altars and heap your remains on the remains of your idols. For my soul, my life shall abhor you. I'll lay waste your cities. We can see all of this stuff is about to happen to Israel. And he says in verse 33, because this came about too, you, however, I will scatter among the nations, and I'll draw out a sword after you, as your land becomes desolate and your cities become waste. But God didn't give up on them easily. He was very, very patient with them. He sent prophet after prophet to turn them back, but they wouldn't listen. Now, this might sound familiar to some of you because we're still seeing that. Same thing. Israel's problem and ours is it's too much fun to do the things that God tells us are not good for us. It was too much fun for them to mix with the very people that God told them to destroy. He sounds cruel, and yet he's not, because he's going to give those people an opportunity to grow up with his spirit. That's way down the road. So in this chapter, if we ever get to it, we'll be looking at 5 of the miracles that God worked through Elisha. And the first one is about the widow of one of the sons of the prophets. Now, this is one of the things I found interesting. In this pagan land of the northern tribes, where they're worshiping Baal, they are spitting in God's face. They aren't doing anything that God told them to do. And yet, in the northern tribes, there was this group of sons of the prophets. There were some in Israel, the northern tribes, who continued to worship God. Not very many, but there were some. And so we're gonna start here in verse 1 of chapter 4, and this is miracle number 5 in that list. Or miracle number 1, if you want to just look at it, that we're going over 5 miracles today. But this is miracle number 5. And the author brings in these 5 miracles, and they're not necessarily in chronological order. But they all do occur in the northern part of the nation of Israel. It says, now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets. Okay, so she's a widow, and her husband had been one of the sons of the prophets, whatever this group was. We don't have a lot of information on that. And actually, I'll stop right here. Does anybody, can any of you all think in your studies, can you give us a little info on these sons of the prophets? Because I'm sorry, I didn't go look, but I can't think of any.
Yep.
Yeah, Jim.
I don't have any, but as we were going through, I think it was 3rd Kings or before, it looks like there's not just one group of sons of the prophets, that there are 2 or 3. In other words, maybe, if you will, separate schools of prophets.
Yeah, maybe some from the north and some from the south.
Or multiple ones in the north. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I just noticed, that when we were going through it before, that it seemed like there were sons of the prophets in at least 2 different places.
Okay.
And, which doesn't really add anything. It doesn't tell us any more about sons of the prophets, except, maybe there were multiple schools of them, and that's.
Yeah, well, these, apparently these are active prophets. They are, the sons of the prophets, yes, but they are God's prophets, apparently. So anyway, this widow of one of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, and this kind of tells us something. Your servant, my husband, is dead. So these sons of the prophets served the prophets, if you will. And he said, and you know that your servant feared Yahweh, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. Okay, now going back to what I read earlier, the scriptures about, if you'll do this and, if you won't, this never should have happened if Israel had obeyed God. Deuteronomy 15. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a remission of debts, the year of release, and then, of course, the Jubilee year. And then he says in verse 4, there's not going to be any poor among you. Why? If you obey me, if you do what I'm telling you to do, and you help people, there aren't going to be any poor among you. Since Yahweh will surely bless you in the land in which Yahweh, your God, your Elohim, is giving you as an inheritance to possess. So he said this long before they ever got to the promised land. But he said, if you'll do what I tell you, you're not going to have any poor people. If only, in verse 5, you listen obediently to the voice of Yahweh, your Elohim, to observe carefully all this commandment which I'm commanding you today, there won't be any poor people. For Yahweh, your Elohim, will bless you as he has promised you, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. That kind of brings me to this country again, and we're seeing, some of the same things happen in this country that parallel what happened, way back then. You will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow, and you'll rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. Now, after I finished my notes, I went back and was looking at some of the commentaries, and I ran across something that I wished that I had put in my notes, but I wasn't going to reprint them and all that. So I'm going to read this section out of, and I can't remember which one. I think it's probably the Bible Knowledge Commentary, or it may be the Complete Biblical Library Comment. But anyway, here's what it says about this section, and there's some of it in here that I think is interesting. An Israelite widow's debts are paid. Now that's the ultimate of the miracle that God worked through Elisha. The next 4.5 chapters of 2 Kings largely center on the notable exploits of Elisha, both in his native land of Israel and also in the surrounding environment in other countries. Elisha goes all over the place. Despite a number of contrasts between the Elijah and the Elisha narratives, where Elijah is mostly working alone, but Elisha is working with disciples, and he has a servant named Gehazi, which we'll get to a little bit later. Elisha did not imitate his master in one major respect, and that is by ministering as God led to both Israelite and non-Israelite alike. Elisha, more than Elijah, would cross over. Whereas Jesus delighted in pointing out to his own contemporaries Elijah's refusal to help the Israelites during the 3.5-year drought, and rather being led to minister to the Phoenician widow, not a Jew, not an Israelite. He helped a Gentile. He also noted Elisha's cleansing of the Syrian leper, or the Armenian leper, Naaman. And it goes on and says, even though there surely were many Israelite lepers whom he did not cleanse. These are some of the things that Jesus said. It is therefore not only in the New Testament, but also in the Old Testament, where we find emphasis on the ministry of God's leaders to Jew and Gentile, as well as to both male and female, rich and poor, famous and obscure. That's what I think the Complete Biblical Library said about some of the differences between Elisha and Elijah, and even brought in some of the comments that our Savior made. So in this chapter, I may have already gone through this, but anyway, we'll be looking at 5 of the miracles that God worked through Elisha, and not in chronological order. And the first one is about this widow of the sons of the prophets. And this shows that there were still Israelites who were obeying God. Not very many, but a few. Okay, so miracle number 5. I've already shown that, haven't I? Okay, sorry. I did that, and then I went through this. And so here we go. Beginning in verse 2. He says, what do you want me to do? I know you're a widow of one of the sons of the prophets. How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? You have anything in the house of value? She said, no. I have a little jar of oil. And he says, okay, here's what I want you to do. Go borrow some vessels at large around from your neighbors, for yourself, from all your neighbors, even empty vessels, and don't just get a few. And you shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, behind you and your sons, and pour out into all these vessels, and you shall set aside what's full. So she went from him. She gathered all the vessels. She shut the door behind her. And they were bringing vessels to her, and she poured. She didn't pour, she poured. Now, this is similar to the second miracle of, the second miracle of Elijah. In 1 Kings 17:14, he multiplied the flour and the oil for the widow and her son so they could live during the 3.5 years of drought. Verse 6, when the vessels were full. Now, we don't know how many she got, but, olive oil was very valuable, especially, in times of drought. I'm not saying that there was a drought here, but anyway, when the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And so she kept doing that. And then he said, that's it. That's the last one. And the oil stopped. Then she came and told the man of God, Elisha, and he said, go and sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest. Now, something to show of the faith of this woman. She didn't know what Elisha was going to do. She did what he told her to do, and she went and she borrowed these vessels from their neighbors that was going to give her enough oil to sell, pay off her debts, her husband's debts, and you and your sons can live on the rest. So that's miracle number, what is that, 5? Yeah, that's miracle number 5. The next miracle was started in verse 8. Hey, Rod, the second half of Isaiah was said by some to be written by a group, some of the sons of prophets. Okay, that's interesting. Thanks. 2 Kings 4, verse 6 is, I'm sorry, I've already done that. Verse 8. It says, now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman. and she persuaded him to eat food. Okay, so when Elisha was going around the country, he went through, and I've got a map to show you where Shunem is. Where there was a prominent woman, she persuaded him to eat food, and so it was as often as he passed by, he went in there to eat food. So, okay, so now we're going to be talking about three places today. We're going to talk about Shunem, which you can see in the big, right in the middle of that, right above the word Israel, is Shunem. And then Mount Carmel is going to be mentioned, and also Gilgal. Now, I didn't put the map that shows the two different locations that some believe Gilgal was. It's up where you see the word Sea of Galilee. It's up. This is one of the places where they thought Gilgal was, and then this is the other where the arrow is pointing at. I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference, but anyway. So every time Elisha passed through Shunem, he would stop and he would eat at this couple's home. And so in verse 9, she said, hey, look, let's build him a little place where he can sleep when he's here. And he comes by here all the time. Let's make a little walled up upper chamber and let us set a bed there for him, and a table and a chair and a lampstand. And it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there. And one day he came there, and he did. He turned into the upper chamber and rested. Apparently this was, maybe on their roof is where they built that. So they made a place for Elisha to stay. And note here that Elisha has a servant named Gehazi. It says, then he said to his servant, hey, look, she's been very, very nice to me. And I think he talks about her because I don't think the husband really cared to help him, but she did. And he said, call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him, and he said, look, you've been really nice to me. I want to do something for you. What can I do for you? You want me to speak to the king or the captain of the army on your behalf? And she said, no, I'm fine. I live among my own people. Elisha wants to do something for her because of her kindness. So here's where miracle number 6 comes in. So he said, what then is to be done for her? He's talking to Gehazi. And she said, well, look, she didn't have a son. She and her husband are old, or at least her husband is old. And he said, call her. And when Gehazi called her, she stood in the doorway. And he said, you're going to have a son this time next year. And she said, and this is interesting, no, my Lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. She didn't believe him. She didn't have faith. She's not talking to God here. She's talking about to a prophet. And she just didn't believe him. But guess what? The woman conceived, bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. Now that's miracle number 6, but there's another one that follows that's still connected with this situation. When the child was grown, okay, we don't know what that means, 18, 25. When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to help in the field. And he said to his father, Dad, my head. And he said to his servant, the father did, carry him to his mother. And when he took him to his mother, she sat there and held him until noon, and he died. So she went up and laid him on the bed that they had made for Elisha, and shut the door behind him and went out. Now, we're going to find that she doesn't tell her husband about this yet. Um, for whatever reason, she did not want her husband to know their child had died. Now, maybe she was afraid of what his reaction was going to be. So she shut the door and she went to find Elisha. She called her husband and said, send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys that I may run to the man of God and return. And you know, her husband is probably thinking, well, she wants to go and ask for prayers that our son will get over his headaches. Now, here's what Adam Clark's commentary says. She was a very prudent woman. She would not harass the feelings of her husband by informing him of the death of his son till she tried the power of the prophet. Now, this is the opinion of the writers of the Adam Clark commentary. So when she told her husband she was going to see Elisha, he made an interesting comment. And I hope that you know, some of you may say something about this. He says, why are you going today? It's not the new moon. It's not the Sabbath. And she said, it will be well. Now, apparently, you know, now remember, they're in the north. Apparently, they had some kind of a custom, apparently, where the only times that you would go to a prophet is when there's a lot of trouble, you know, that you would need help, or on the new moon or the Sabbath. Now, there's always been a lot of controversy or discussion or disagreement or whatever you want to call it about the new moon, about whether we as Christians should celebrate the new moon, whether it should be a Sabbath, whether, and so on. And so he questioned the need for her to go since it wasn't a religious festival, if you will. And so this brings up that question about new moons. Now, anybody's welcome to express their opinions. Here's mine. God gives us his list of holy days in Leviticus 23. Doesn't say anything about new moons. But how do you know when a holy day is going to occur? By the calendar. How's the calendar used? First day of the month starts with a new moon. So that's the way I look at new moons. Now, God states in other places that there will be future fasts and other celebrations, and you know the new moon will be celebrated. I think there's a scripture about that, but those seem to be future occurrences. So, in my opinion, new moons are for the marking of beginning of months. Any other thoughts? Anybody got a?
I agree with you. You know, there are people that I know that are messianic that make a big deal about, you know, the fact that we're not having a holy day celebration on a new moon. And as you mentioned, there's no command in Torah that we needed to observe them as a holy day or a commemoration. And but at the same time, as you just said, it is the way that they mark the calendar. So having back in the day, having a public acknowledgement or congregational acknowledgement that this is another one of the beginning of God's, you know, the next month, so they can keep track, so that they are accurately, you know, keeping the holy moeds is good and fine. I got no problem. Even today, if people want to get together and have a prayer service or a meal or something to acknowledge the new moon, that's fine. Like everything else, in my personal opinion, it becomes a problem when people are, you know, establishing it as a doctrine that, you know, we must do this, or we're not in the right congregation, or we're disobeying God. Because I don't, as you said, Skip, I don't read anywhere in Torah, like in Leviticus 23 or Numbers, where we have a command that these are the dates that you get together to acknowledge the beginning of my months.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
I recall reading some ceremonial thing for the Levite to do on the new moon, but there's no instruction for the people in celebrating the new moon. I think it's probably more for the Levite to keep track of, like you say, the time and things like that.
Yeah, to me, and I may be oversimplifying it, but to me, it's like saying, okay, today's the 1st of June. Today's the 1st of October, and so on. If I'm not mistaken, the only holy day that's on a new moon is trumpets. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, we don't. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that was it. I was going to continue on.
Well, so Exodus 19, verse 1 mentions the new moon. On the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Okay, so that implies that they were noticing the other new moons. But the term, the specific note is that it's not mentioned on the 1st new moon. Now I'm thinking back, what does Exodus say? This is the beginning of months. It just says this is the beginning of months. And on the 14th or the 10th day of the month, you'll take the lamb. So they were aware of when the new moon was.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a calendar counting point. Okay, so that is a calendar counting point in Exodus 19. And Numbers 29 says, beside the burnt offering of the new moon and its grain offering, and regular burnt offering and its grain offering. So it's discussing offerings, burnt offerings, things that are offered in the tabernacle offering system. That's the only 2 places in the book of the law, in the first 5 books, that the term's mentioned. So I'm happy with Michael's and your explanation.
Anybody else? Okay, well, let's go on. It's a calendar issue. To me, it's interesting that this subject comes up in the Northern Kingdom of all places, as they've almost totally given up worshiping the Most High God. I'm like, of course, this family seems to maybe be, worshipful at least. So anyway, all right. So off she went. She saddled a donkey. She took her, got her servant and said, drive and go forward and don't slow down the pace for me unless I tell you to. I mean, she was in a hurry. Her son was dead. And she had faith that God, through Elisha, could raise him. Now, she may have had faith that Elisha could, but I don't know. I don't want to go there. So she took off, and quickly, while her servant led, Elisha was only a few miles away at Mount Carmel. I told you I had a map, but I'm not going to give it to you yet. So she went and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. You remember Mount Carmel? Elijah did a pretty big job on Mount Carmel. And it says, when the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, look, here comes that Shunammite woman that has been helping me. And here's the map. And Mount Carmel, Shunem, and Gilgal. And as I told you, Gilgal also, they think it may be up there closer to the Sea of Galilee. Have I showed you this map already? Maybe I've looked at it 50 times this morning. Maybe that's what it is.
No, I don't recall.
Okay, good. Okay, so you can see it's not that far, but it's all north in Jerusalem. I mean, in Israel, although I'm not sure about Gilgal. And also, as I've said, some of the commentaries, some of the scholars believe Gilgal was much further north. But anyway you go, it was not a great long trip from Shunem, to
Look,
Mount.
it's Skip.
Yeah,
I mean, now think about it. She's on a little donkey, and that looks like a 20-mile trip one way.
yeah.
And, so there and back is probably a full day's trip.
True.
I mean, it's not a long way.
Yeah, but it takes a lot to do it on a donkey.
Yeah, I mean, I think my rear end would be a little bit sore by the time I got there.
Yeah, well, they're a little more used to riding on donkeys than we are. But yes, I know what you're saying. Okay, so in verse 26, and here's a couple of interesting things here. And I know I say that word a lot. Elisha said to his servant, "I want go meet her and ask her, is there a problem? Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?" Okay, I want to stop there for just a second. Elisha didn't know. God had not told Elisha that the boy was dead, or even that the boy was sick, apparently. But then she says something very interesting. Not something I would have expected her to say. When she was asked, "Is it well?" she said, "Yeah, everything's great. It is well." Why would she say it is well since it absolutely was not well? Now, the only thing that I can think of here is that she's talking ultimately because she has faith that her son's going to be raised from the dead. That's, other than that, I don't know why in the world she would say it's well. Anybody got any thoughts on that one? All right.
Well, the word is shalom. And the term, I think that word has a wide usage that includes peace. So, but it's obvious she didn't want to tell Gehazi.
Yeah.
So maybe she was peaceful, but that wasn't the whole story. Maybe things were okay, but that wasn't the whole story. She didn't want to tell Gehazi.
Yeah, and then I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
And then in a minute, in a few verses down, we're going to see she really didn't want Gehazi to be the one to go see her son. We'll see that here in just a minute. In verse 27, it says when she came to Elisha, okay, she's not dealing with Gehazi at this point. She caught hold of his feet. And Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God said, "Let her alone, for her soul is troubled." He knew something was wrong. And Yahweh has hidden it from me and has not told me. I find that kind of interesting. But this part about the taking hold of someone's feet, in that day and time, taking hold of someone's feet was the ultimate gesture of humility. Now, I can't help but connect this a little bit to what our Savior did on the night that he was betrayed. When he took hold of the feet of his disciples, and he was showing humility, he was showing service, he was showing, and so on. The Bible Knowledge Commentary says this: arriving where Elisha was, she grasped his feet, a gesture indicating extreme humility, need, and desperation. So if that's the case, Elisha knew something bad was wrong, but he didn't know what, because God had not told him. But Gehazi felt that her behavior was improper. But Elisha recognized it as the expression of deepest grief. Okay? So not surprisingly, she kind of lectures Elisha. And she said, didn't I tell you not to deceive me about having a son? Now, the way I take that is, yeah, you gave me a son, but now you took him away. Didn't I tell you? Okay, here's the scripture. At this point, it becomes evident that Elisha realizes that the boy has died. But for some reason, rather than saying, I'll go with you, he tells her to take his staff and lay it along the boy's body up to his face. He said to Gehazi, gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, go your way. If you meet anybody, don't pay attention to them, just keep going and lay my staff on the lad's face. Initially, why did Elisha not say to the lady, sure, I'm going to saddle up my donkey and let's go? But he didn't do that. He was going to send Gehazi and his staff. Now, one of the things I read in the commentaries was that it was very uncommon. As a matter of fact, this may be the only staff that is mentioned except for, I think, Moses. Anyway, in verse 28, she said, didn't I say don't deceive me? Don't give me a son and then take him away. But she'll have no part of that. Ain't happening, Elisha. Get up. Elijah's going with him, even if she has to drag him. The mother of the lad said, as Yahweh lives, and as you yourself lives, I will not leave you. Nope, you're not staying here. I'm staying with you until you agree to come. So he arose and he followed her. And then Gehazi went on ahead of them. And he did what Elisha had told him and laid the staff on the lad's face, length of his body and also on his face. But nothing happened. So he returned to meet him and told him the lad is not awake. In other words, they were halfway there. He got there early. It didn't work. And he came back to tell him, didn't work. His staff didn't do the trick. So Elisha came into the house and noted that the boy was dead, and Elisha laid on his bed. The boy was laid on his bed. So Elisha entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to Yahweh. And he went up and he laid on the child. I mean, he was putting his body in contact with the boys, and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands and so on. And the flesh of the child became warm. He was coming back to life. Then Elisha returned and walked in the house and once back and forth. Apparently he went back and forth. And he went up again and stretched himself. And the lad, it says sneezed. And I didn't mark, could you look that up? I didn't look it up, but some of the commentaries say that was a convulsion of some kind. It says he sneezed 7 times and the lad opened his eyes.
It doesn't, what I have doesn't say anything special about it. It just says sneeze.
Okay. So in verse 36, Elisha calls Gehazi again and says, go get the lady. And when she came into him, he said, your son's alive. Take him up. Love him. Hug him. Then she went in and fell at his feet, and fell at Elisha's feet, and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. Okay. Miracle number 8. When Elisha returned to Gilgal, and I showed you.
Skip,
Yes, Barb.
before you go on to number 8, I find it unusual that Elisha, when he gave the staff to his servant, that it did not work. I mean, it's kind of like using the anointing cloth in the way, you say a prayer over anointing cloth and then it should work. Well, I find it unusual that the staff didn't work.
Yeah. Jesus told his disciples one time when they came back and said, hey, we're trying to cast these demons out, but it's not working. And he said, well, sometimes you have to do it with prayer and fasting. And I don't know if that's a similar situation or not, but apparently God was telling Elisha, this is your job. It's not Gehazi's job. Now, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's kind of the way I look at it. Anything else?
Well,
Yeah,
it
Jim.
made me wonder when she went over there to tell them, and Elisha sent Gehazi out to meet her. She didn't tell him anything, like you said. She just said everything's okay, and so she didn't perceive that Gehazi had any power or anything. She only wanted to talk to Elisha. So, you kind of wonder because Gehazi would have gone back with her when she continued on and went to Elisha and told him then about her son, and Gehazi would have been thinking, well, why didn't you tell me that, So I just, it crossed my mind that maybe God was offering an opportunity for her to see that she didn't have to rely on the man himself, that the power could be passed through Gehazi, through the staff, even if Gehazi had it. And maybe it was to, restore his self-esteem or whatever, but then she insisted and everything kind of changed. So it doesn't really explain it, but clearly at the beginning, she didn't see Gehazi as having any power at all. And when he gave the staff to Gehazi, she still didn't think that was good enough, So, yeah, just an interesting thing.
That's a good point that both of you have made. I think it's a typical human reaction. I'm going, and I know this is a silly analogy, but I'm going with a group of savings and loan people to DC to talk to congressmen to see if they can help us out with some legislation. And they put us in a room with one of his staff members. And we said, no. We want to talk to the congressman. She obviously didn't have faith in Gehazi being able to heal. But what's interesting is the part about the staff. Elisha, I suppose, thought that God would work through his staff, but apparently not. So anyway, I'm sorry, I probably messed up what you all are saying. Miracle number 8. When Elisha returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. Now, he's been gone for 3 days and gets home and there's a famine. No, these things are not in chronological order. There was already a famine going on. And this is a different time. apparently, then, it wasn't bang, 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 bang with these 5 miracles. These are things that happened over a period of time, and they're not chronological. So when Elijah went back to Gilgal, which, by the way, he came from Mount Carmel. Now he's going back to Gilgal. So it's a different time. But anyway, when he returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. Well, he already knew that. And the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said, "Put on a large pot, boil some stew for the sons of the prophets." Well, they sent a man out to find some wild plants and gourds and things. And either he wasn't familiar with the area, or he was a novice at picking wild plants, or both, but he almost killed all of the sons of the prophets. It's like you send somebody out to get some mushrooms and they bring back the wrong kind. Everybody's going to be dead pretty soon. Verse 39. Then one went out to the field to gather some herbs, and he found this vine. And, wow, that looks good to eat. I'm gonna take it along with some gourds. And they the guys doing the cooking didn't know any better, and they sliced up these vines and put them in the stew. For they did not know what they were. Oh, really? Okay, we're going camping. And Diane says, "Skip, go out and gather some whatever." So I go out and I gather a bunch of stuff and I bring them back. She said, "What is that?" "I don't know. It looks good." She's not putting that in the pot, I can assure you. So they poured it out for the men to eat. And as they were eating, they got really, really sick and said to Elisha, "We're about to die." And they were unable to eat. I presume that means that their stomachs were very upset. But he said, "Okay, I'm going to fix this. Now bring me some meal." And he threw it into the pot, and he said, "Pour it out for the people that they may eat." There was nothing magical about meal. And all meal would have done, I suppose, would be to dilute it. This was a miracle that God performed through Elisha and saved everybody's life. Because when he put the meal in there was no harm in the pot. Now, in verse 42, and this doesn't really have anything to actually, this is, I didn't separate that. This is the beginning of miracle number 9. A man came from Baal Elisha. How would you like to be from there? And brought the man of God bread of the first fruits. Okay, so here was his offering, and this kind of goes back, if you will, to the husband who said, "Why are you going? It's not time to take the offering. It's not the new moon, and it's not the Sabbath. So why are you going?" But a man came from Baal Elisha and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elisha said, "Give them to the people that they may eat." And this is miracle number 9. And his attendant said, "You got to be kidding me. I'm going to put this little bit of food before 100 men." And if you'll notice, I have a note up there. It's similar to Christ feeding the 5,000. But Elisha said, "Give it to them anyway, that they may eat. For thus says Yahweh, they shall eat and have some left over." So his attendant, I presume that may be Gehazi, may not have been, but anyway, his attendant said, "There's not enough food." And Elisha says, oh, yes, there is. Not only that, but you're going to have some left over. So he set it before them, and they ate. And they did have some left over according to the word of Yahweh. So that was his ninth miracle. And it's the end of this chapter. And like I said at the beginning, this chapter's different from the ones that we had talked about before. But the writer of Second Kings wanted us to be familiar, I presume, wanted us to be familiar with the miracles that God worked through Elisha. So that's all I've got. Now, one thing I want to tell you, not that it matters, because Michael always does a great job, but Diane and I are going to a wedding next Sabbath. Our oldest grandson is getting married. What is he, 25, Diane? I think that's right.
Yes, he's 25.
Yeah, 25. And he's our first. So we'll be going to Oklahoma on Friday morning. And then there's a rehearsal dinner Saturday night or something. The wedding's going to be Sunday. So anyway, okay. Any thoughts, comments, corrections, etc.?
Can we see the list of all the miracles?
Okay, of Elisha's, there's Elijah's and there's Elisha's. Which do you want first?
Elisha. So which ones did we?
All right, we did 5, providing the widow's oil.
Okay.
6, Elisha's annunciation that she's going to have a son. 7, the resurrection of the son.
Right.
8, purifying the poisoned soup, and 9, the multiplication of loaves.
Right. So I was going to see if there's a direct connection to Christ's ministry, but Elisha is only mentioned once in the New Testament. I believe that's right. And Elijah is shown to be a type, but he's mainly a type of John the Baptist.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, you have some things that are indicative of Jesus' actions also. So, the Elisha healing the son is kind of likened to the ruler of the synagogue coming, and Jesus went to the house, and the child died, and Jesus still went, and he said she's just sleeping. So there are some likenesses here, and I think in general you could say some of these things are pointing toward the deliverance, that are examples of how Jesus was his ministry testified of these type of things, maybe not all of them specifically, like removing the poison in the poison soup, etc., but still feeding the 5,000 out of nothing. There are probably some very important things that we could say, okay, these are types, or these are things that people might be looking for, as parallels from the Old Testament to Jesus, to the ministry of the Messiah.
Mark,
Yeah.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that Elijah is a type of John and Elisha a type of Christ. And if you think about it, Elisha's got more power than Elijah. Jesus had more power than John. And yet Jesus said there, was nobody greater than John. So I think basically, I'm just saying I agree.
Yeah, I think your point's well taken, Jim. On the other hand, I think that we shouldn't seek to restrict and say only the things that Elisha did are only indicative of John the Baptist, or Elijah did are only indicative of John the Baptist, and the things that Elisha did are only indicative of Jesus.
I agree. I mean, it's not, it's not identical, but it's similar is the best word.
Yeah. I fully agree with that. I think that we should be taking these lessons as not just isolated happenings that took place thousands of years ago, but we ought to take Jesus at his word when he said that the things that were written down in the law and the prophets were pointing to him. So I think we ought to try to remember that. And the points here is that, there's deliverance, there's some justice, there is a lot of different things that would point to the anointed one who came to deliver mankind from sin. And another thing Jesus said was, that was Peter, sorry. Peter said, save yourself from this untoward generation. And there's a lot of parallels there that Elijah and, specifically Elisha are making here to point people to God whom they by and large had turned away from.
There's one other little thing, and it is a little thing, but something at least to take note of, that Elisha followed Elijah and Jesus followed John. I don't know that, that's just another little tidbit. And I'm talking chronologically. I'm not saying Jesus followed John the Baptist. But yeah, and there may be a lot to that. I'm sure, if you want to go and look up some kind of I don't know, with metaphors of Elisha's miracles, analogies of so on, you might find some pretty good research on it. I don't know. I haven't done that, but it might be interesting. If somebody wants to do that, we'd be glad to set aside some time and let you make a report. But Michael, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for parallels, they may not have been all fulfilled in the time that Christ was here physically on earth. And some of these, relief from enemy and famine, the ones that are coming, defeats and so on of enemies, that may be Christ's return. But we're still at this is similar. you know,
there are a lot of things. I was just looking at this number 13, capturing a band of Armenians by striking them blind. Well, wasn't there a time when, when the people came to arrest Jesus, and he spoke and they fell backwards? It's not exactly the same, but the point is that there is in power in these the anointed of God. So I think if we not try to make it too exact, and yet get the point that God is making, is that there is deliverance in his way, even amongst a untoward generation that was all around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of that's good. I mean, there's a reason that, how do I say this? God didn't put everything in the Bible. He didn't have everything written, but he had all the important stuff. So that, this is something to take note of. One other thing that I find interesting is that Elisha did not, unlike Solomon, he didn't ask God for the gift. He asked Elijah for the gift of a double portion of his spirit. I don't think it means anything. I just think it's kind of interesting that God, through Elijah, answered Elisha's request.
Skip, you might want to address some Rod's comments.
Yeah, Rod made two comments. One, he says the second half of Isaiah was said by some to be written by a group, maybe even the sons of the prophets, sometimes said to be like a church group. Okay, interesting. And then he said of the oil, he was talking about something Ron had said, which I agree with 100%. I think all of us do. The oil would have kept coming as long as there were empty bowls or empty jars. She got enough and then some, but she could have continued, and the oil would have kept going. And Rod says she was not an Israelite. The New Testament, I think, says Shumanite. Now she lived there, and it was in the northern part of Israel, but right. I mean, I don't know whether she was an Israelite.
I think that's related to the one that Jesus pointed out that Elijah visited. That she was the miracle we've already seen, that the one up close to Tyre.
Yeah.
Or Sidon.
This one
raised a widow's son from the dead.
Yeah.
Multiplied flour and oil for a widow, so there's that. I mean, we can look it up. There's actually some interesting stuff about that, but yeah, Jesus pointed to the fact that Elijah was sent to that person, and then you find out that Elisha, and then he also says that Elisha was sent to, or he healed Naaman. There were lots of lepers, but he only healed Naaman. And there was, now it's starting to come back. And Elijah was not sent to a bunch of people in Israel. He was sent to this widow who wasn't in. There were lots of widows in Israel, but he was sent to one who was in a Gentile country site.
Yeah, and he makes a point of that. Do you remember, Mark, did that have anything to do with take the gospel to the Gentiles?
Well, it was used, now it's all coming back to me. It was used by Jesus when he was at Nazareth and read the scroll, and they looked at him, and he said, people would say, "Heal yourself, physician."
Yeah.
He said, "A prophet's not without honor except in his own country." And then he gave those two examples. Elijah was sent to a widow, not in Israel, but in a Gentile land. And he was healed a leper, not in Israel, but to a Gentile.
Well,
And they
and
got very angry at that.
the first time Jesus, at least first recorded time, Jesus basically says he's the Messiah. It was the Messiah. It was not to an Israelite.
Say that again.
The first time that Jesus, outright said, "I am Messiah," it was not to an Israelite. It was to that Samaritan woman.
To the woman at the well?
Yeah, the woman at the well, and then she went and brought other folks, and he taught them for a couple of days. And, and they weren't Israelites. That may not have literally been the first time that he said, "I'm Messiah," but it's, I think, chronologically, at least what we see in the Gospels, chronologically, it's the first time he said, I'm Messiah, I am he.
Yeah, that may have been before, but he was in the synagogue and he read that part about Isaiah.
Yeah, and I think that was later.
Okay,
but
that was later. All right. Okay.
And basically, those points are saying, I am the anointed one, not just to this small, insignificant nation that doesn't even have half of it, but I am the anointed one for all mankind.
Yeah.
That's where we get included.
There was something I was going to say, but it's gone. So I'm sure some of you know what that's like. Okay. All right. Anybody else? This has been interesting. This was an interesting chapter, and I know I use that word a lot, but it was very different. It wasn't chronological. It was, the writer of 2 Kings was inspired to write down 5 of Elisha's miracles. So, all right. Anybody else? Well, okay. Diane and I would appreciate prayers because our whole family's, our other daughter and her 4 kids, she and her husband, her 3 kids, are going. Diane and I are going. The mother.
Where are you going? Where is it?
It's in Oklahoma City.
Oh.
Which makes no sense, but they didn't ask me.
Is that where they're living?
No, they live.
That's where they went to school, and both of them got their master's degree, but they're living in Texas right now.
And her mom and dad live in Texas. So if they'd had the wedding in Texas, the only people that would have had to travel would have been our family, and everybody else could have stayed home. But now everybody has to travel. But hey, the kids that are getting married get to make those calls.
Well, I think it had special meaning for them because that's where they met, was in Oklahoma City. So I think that's why.
Oh, I think you're right. I think that's
Well, at least they didn't make the wedding in Mexico, down on the Yucatan or something like that.
true. It wasn't a destination. It wasn't a destination. But I have.
No, we're not going to call Oklahoma City a destination, right? You can't do a destination wedding there.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a destination wedding though, as based on the way people talk about. Our other daughter did have a destination wedding, but since Diane and I were the parents of the bride, it ended up being cheaper than if we'd had a big wedding here. So we all went to Orlando, had a good time, and then came back, and a few weeks later we had a reception here in Jonesboro. So, okay. Michael, you be ready for next week?
Yeah, I'll have something that ties into what we talked about today. We'll have an open discussion more than a study of a few scriptures, but hopefully we'll just have a roundtable talk. I kind of have a direction I'd like to go in, kind of surrounding a question, but yeah, we'll have a good talk next week, and it'll still be on point on subject in regards to the prophets and what we've been reading in your studies in the last week or so.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody showing up and putting up with me. I'm going to unrecord.